Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Muhammad Farghal. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about referential semantics. Traditionally, language philosophers define semantics as the relationship between language and the outside world. If we look at language, we find words that refer and words that do not refer. The words that only have sense. So a word like table refers to something in the outside world. A word like pen, book, hand, etc. and so forth, all refer to objects in the outside world. But words like but, that, and almost, they don't refer. They don't represent things in the outside world the way book and table do. But notice that all words in language have sense, but not all of them have reference. Now, if we look at reference, we can readily find two types of reference: variable reference and constant reference. Variable reference comes in two forms. The variability may be in the referent or in the expression. This simply means that the referent can vary from one context to another, or we can vary the expression. We have the same thing, but it can be called by different expressions. Okay, variable reference that involves variability in referent, the thing that's referred to, is all around, all right? If we look at any expression in language, most expression, for example, my university, as used by speakers of English, can refer to thousands of different universities. So the expression my university has variable reference. It depends on where the person is and the time also. So it is connected with the spatio-temporal parameter, depending on where the speaker is. For example, if I work for Kuwait University and I say my university, then I'm referring to Kuwait University. Someone else in the States using the same expression, my university, would be referring to a different university. Not that these expressions usually involve common nouns rather than proper nouns. But here we have an exception. Personal names, for example, also have variable reference. John, for example, has variable reference. Why? Because we have tens of thousands of people called John. Muhammad has variable reference. If you call out Muhammad while in the marketplace, probably 10 people would look back, thinking that you are calling them. Why? Because Muhammad has variable reference. So variable reference here involves common nouns as well as personal names. The other type of variable reference has to do with the expression we use. This simply means that the same object may receive different labels. For example, Donald Trump, the American president, the leader of the Republican Party, the American commander-in-chief. Even we can go as far as Melina's husband, Ivanka's father. Okay, all these expressions do refer to the same person, don't they? So the variability here is in the expression rather than in the referent. The referent is one and the same, but the expression is different. If we, for example, historically, all right, the Holy River and the River Jordan, they denote the same river. Lot Lake and the Dead Sea, they denote the same body of water. This is variability in expression rather than variability in referent. Now, when we contextualize reference in the passage of communication, we use reference. Now we have two types of expressions. We have referring expressions and we have generic expressions. And the difference between them is straightforward. A referring expression refers to one particular member of the class or a group of members. A non-referring expression or a generic expression refers to the whole class rather than one particular member or a group of members of that class. So if I'm talking about Americans, saying Americans love partying, Americans here is a generic expression. But if I say these American students love partying, I'm not referring here to all Americans, but rather to one particular group of Americans. So these American students here is a referring expression, whereas Americans in the other sense, Americans love partying, here Americans is a generic expression. Toyotas are economical. Toyotas here is a generic expression. But if I say my Toyota is economical, then I am referring to one particular car. And my Toyota here is a referring expression. Notice that this kind of difference between referring expression and generic expression gives rise to two types of sentences in language, two types of utterances. We have generic sentences and we have non-generic sentences. Non-generic sentences involve reference to particular members of the class or group of members. John went shopping this morning. When John here, John is a referring expression, and this sentence is non-generic. Why? Because it's about John. Whereas a sentence like Toyotas are economical is a generic sentence. Why? Because it makes a general statement about a whole class. So the difference between a generic sentence and a non-generic sentence has to do with whether the sentence is about one particular member of the class or the whole class. A non-generic sentence makes a statement about one particular member of the class or a group of members, whereas a generic sentence makes a general statement about a whole class. Within non-generic sentences, we have a special kind of sentence we call equative sentence. And the equative sentences establish equivalence between X and Y. When X and Y have the same identity, that's why they are called equative. For example, the sentence, Donald Trump is the current American president, is an equative sentence. And it is reversible. We can reverse X and Y by saying the current American president is Donald Trump. So this type of sentence is non-generic. Basically, if it has referring expressions like Donald Trump and the American president, but it may be generic, but this is the exception rather than the rule. All right, okay, you may find semanticists describing this sentence as non-generic, but in fact, it can be generic sometimes. So a sentence like, the lion is the king of the jungle, is an equative sentence. Here, I'm equating X with Y, and this sentence does not have any referring expressions. And it is, in fact, generic. It is reversible. Say, the king of the jungle is the lion. So here we have an equative sentence that does not have referring expressions, but the rule is that equative sentences establish equivalence between referring expressions. For example, the Dead Sea is Lot Lake. Lot Lake is the Dead Sea. The Holy River is the River Jordan. The River Jordan is the Holy River. Okay, these are equative sentences and they involve referring expression. Notice that the copula in equative sentences functions as a predicate here. It's in fact the only instance where the copula functions as a predicate. In other words, it has meaning. It's not only a linking device. In a sentence like, John is playing the piano. Here, the copula in this sentence is just a linking device. And the predicate in this sentence, the predicator is play rather than the copula. But in a sentence like, the Dead Sea is Lot Lake, here the copula establishes equivalence between the Dead Sea and Lot Lake. In other words, it expresses an identity relation. X and Y have the same identity. That's why we call this فعل الكينونة. فعل الكينونة فقط في الجمل التعادلية. It carries meaning only in equative sentences. Elsewhere, it's only used as a linking device. In other words, it has no semantic content. Okay, now we have referring expressions and we have generic expressions. In semantics, what about how can we analyze a sentence semantically? The semantic structure of a sentence is called argument structure. So a sentence has an argument structure rather than a syntactic structure, the way we do it in grammar. So in semantics, we talk about argument structures of sentences. So every sentence has an argument structure. And the argument structure of a sentence is supposed to involve referring expressions and generic expressions. And these are called arguments. That's why this is called an argument structure. So every sentence has an argument structure. And the argument structure consists of a number of arguments plus a predicator, a word that relates the arguments together. And this is it's a predicate, but in sentences we call it a predicator because it functions as a connector or a relator between X and Y and Z sometimes, depending on the type of predicate we have. The type of predicate has to do with its degree. But before I talk about degree of predicates, let me distinguish between the term predicate and the term word. In semantics, we have predicates, and the predicate has only one given meaning, one specific meaning. A word can be ambiguous. So, all right, for example, when I use the word bank here in isolation, we don't know what it refers to. Why? Because bank is ambiguous. Does it, for example, refer to a financial institution, or does it refer to the bank of a lake or a river? At word level, this is not possible unless we index these words. We by, for example, bank 1, bank 2, bank 3, bank 4, bank 5, etc. So each of these is a predicate. So that's why in semantics we use the term predicate. Why? Because it is more appropriate. A predicate refers to one given sense, one specific sense of the word, rather than the multiple senses. So the argument structure of a sentence, as I have just stated, consists of a number of arguments. And by now we know that an argument can be either a referring expression or a generic expression, plus a predicator. And the function of the predicator is to relate the arguments together. And it must have a degree. The degree of a predicate refers to the minimal number of arguments required in the sentence. And here we have to distinguish between core arguments and satellite arguments. And this corresponds in syntax, corresponds to a verb complement versus an adjunct. The verb complement must be there. Without it, the sentence will be ungrammatical. And the adjunct is optional. You can drop it. It has to do with how informative the sentence is, rather than whether the sentence is grammatical or not. Now, the same thing applies to core arguments and satellite arguments. A core argument must be there. Without it being there, the sentence would not be acceptable. For example, the sentence, John gave Mary. This sentence is not acceptable. Why? Because there is a core argument missing. John gave Mary what? John gave Mary a book. If I supply the core argument, then the sentence becomes acceptable. John gave Mary a book is acceptable. John gave Mary a book yesterday. Now, yesterday is a satellite argument. We can drop it. Only the informativity of the sentence is affected, but not the acceptability of the sentence. This simply means that John gave Mary a book yesterday is more informative than John gave Mary a book. That's why yesterday is called the satellite argument. In this lecture, I'll talk only about core arguments. I'm not going to look at satellite arguments anymore. So the degree of a predicate refers to the minimal number of core arguments required in a sentence. So John gave Mary a book. Here we have, how many arguments do we have? We have 3 arguments. John, Mary, a book. So give here is a 3-place predicate. It requires 3 arguments. Kill. John killed is not acceptable. Why? Because there is a missing core argument. We need to supply a core argument. John killed a rat. Now, the sentence is acceptable. Why? Because kill is a 2-place predicate. Sleep. John is sleeping. Sleep requires only 1 core argument. So sleep is a 1-place predicate. So if we look at verbs as one type of predicate in language, we can see that they manifest different degrees. We have 1-place predicates, we have 2-place predicates, and we have 3-place predicates. And in English, even we have zero place predicates, whether verbs and adjectives usually are zero place predicates. For example, it's raining. Do we have any arguments in this sentence? It here is a dummy it. It does not refer to anything. So here we only have the predicate rain. So rain here is a zero place predicate. Drizzle, snow, hot, chilly, freezing. All right, all of them can be used as, or in fact, some of them are zero place predicates. And some of them, okay, some of them may be, for example, hot. We say it's hot. And here, hot is a zero place predicate. But you can also say the weather is hot today. Okay, so here is a one place predicate. But when it comes to snowing, snow here is a zero place predicate. Can you say the weather is snowing? No, it's not. This is not possible. So zero is a zero place predicate. Now, this is insofar as verbs are concerned. And verbs, not that. A verb can be ambiguous. In other words, it involves many predicates rather than one predicate. So we cannot say, for example, walk. Walk, the most familiar sense of walk is, all right, the intransitive verb. John is walking. Walk here is a one-place predicate. Okay. But we have other walks, not only this walk. Mary is walking her dog. Okay, walk to. Walk to here is a two-place predicate. The policeman walked the lost child to his home. Notice that if I only said the policeman walked the lost child, yeah, this is not acceptable. All right, why? Because we need one more argument. So walk, we have walk one, walk two, and walk three, and each of them has a different degree. Walk one is a one-place predicate. Walk two is a two-place predicate. Walk three is a three-place predicate. So when it comes to verbs, okay, the degree of the predicate varies in English, from zero predicate to three-place predicate. Verbs are, in fact, the most important type of predicates in language. Not every word in language is a predicate. Predicates fall into four categories. We have four categories of predicates. We have verbs, except the verb to be. The verb to be is not a predicate. Why? Because it's mainly used as a linking device. As I have already mentioned, it can be a predicate only in acquaintive sentences. So when I say John is playing the piano, all right, play here is a two-place predicate, and we have John and we have the piano, all right, two arguments. Notice that is here is only a linking device, does not carry any semantic content. So we have verbs, except for the verb be or the copula. We have common nouns. We have, okay, I tell you what. Okay, let me go back to reference. Okay, when we distinguish between variable reference and constant reference, I only dwelled on variable reference. I forgot to dwell on constant reference. So let me say a word quickly about constant reference. Constant reference involves unique entities. If there is only one entity in the outside world, then we refer to it uniquely. That's what we call constant reference. For example, Paris has constant reference. Lot Lake has constant reference. So proper nouns, except for personal names, which have variable reference, all of them have constant reference. So the Nile, Harvard University. Some personal names representing important people also have constant reference. Plato, for example, if I say today I'm going to talk about Plato. I'm not going to talk about someone in my class called Plato, but rather I'm talking about the Greek philosopher or Shakespeare or Ibn Rushd. Okay, all these have constant reference. So it's possible for personal names to swap category, right? The same may apply to some common nouns. For example, fate, destiny. Fate with a capital F is not the same as fate with a small f. Destiny. Heaven with small h is not the same as heaven with a capital H. Heaven with a capital H has constant reference, but with a small h, it has variable reference. Okay, I'm sorry about that, all right? Okay, now I resume my discussion of degree of predicate. I have said that we have 4 categories of predicates. We have verbs, except for the verb be. We have common nouns. We have adjectives, and we have prepositions. These are the 4 categories of predicates, and they are listed in dictionaries. But we have other words that are not predicates. For example, John is not a predicate in English. Why? Because John is a proper noun. And is not a predicate. Why? Because and is a conjunction. That is not a predicate. Almost is not a predicate. So it cannot, all these words or all these words cannot relate X to Y the way predicates do. Okay, if we look at common nouns, we can see that most common nouns are one-place predicates. We only need one argument. For example, John is a mechanic. Mary is a teacher. Teacher, mechanic. Okay, they are one-place predicates. We have a group of common nouns that are relational in nature. They are called relational nouns. Kinship terms, for example, father, uncle, mother, cousin. These are two-place predicates, basically, all right? So, for example, John is an uncle. No, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe if you pre-modify it, it becomes acceptable. John is a good uncle. Mary is a good mother, is okay. Mary is a mother. It can also be acceptable. So it's possible to use them sometimes as one-place predicates, but basically, semantically, they are relational nouns. They relate X to Y. Jane is Mary's mother. Not that. Here we have Jane and Mary, two arguments. So mother here relates Jane and Mary. So mother is a two-place predicate. The same applies to adjectives. Adjectives, most adjectives are one-place predicates. My car is expensive. John is intelligent, expensive, intelligent. They are one-place predicates. But again, within the category of adjectives, we also have relational adjectives. An adjective like fond. John is fond. Is that possible? It's not possible. Why? Because we have John is fond of Mary. Now, fond here is a two-place predicate. Why? Because fond is a relational adjective, different. My car is different. Different from what? So different here is a two-place predicate. And finally, we have the category of prepositions. Okay, all right. If we exclude between, the rest of prepositions in language are two-place predicates. They relate X to Y. I mean, they are all right. We have to have two arguments in a sentence using in or with or for. Okay. My book is on. Is this possible? It's not possible. It's not acceptable. My book is on the table. So on here relates the book to the table. So it's the predicator of the sentence. Mary is in her room. In relates Mary to her room, to the room. So in here is a two-place predicate. Between is the exception here because between is a three-place predicate. Between requires three arguments. Jordan is located between Palestine and can I say between Palestine and Iraq. Now it makes sense. Why? Because we have to have three arguments when we use the preposition between. Okay, so as you can see, we have four categories of predicates, and these predicates have different degrees, ranging between zero-place predicates and three-place predicates. So the argument structure of a sentence consists of a number of arguments, a number of core arguments, and some satellite arguments, but in this lecture, I'm discussing only core arguments. And the degree of the predicate refers to the minimal number of core arguments required in the sentence in order for the sentence to be acceptable. And not that this is, all right, if we look at Arabic, we have similar data. For example, أعطى. أعطى is a three-place predicate. أعطى علي محمدا. Is this an acceptable sentence? Not acceptable. Why? Because we need one more argument. أعطى علي محمدا كتابا. Now the sentence is acceptable. قتل. قتل علي is not acceptable. قتل علي الأفعى. Now it is acceptable. Why? Because قتل requires two core arguments. So the argument structure of a sentence using kill must have two arguments. Notice that a predicate may be one word or maybe more than one word. If, for example, phrasal verbs in English are predicates. Look for, look at, look into, look over, look after. All these are different predicates in English. Notice that they have different meanings. Look down upon is one predicate. Okay, look down upon. All right, we have three words. So this is a three-word predicate in English. And it's a two-place predicate. John is looking down upon. Is this acceptable? No, it's not acceptable. John looks down upon his boss. Now the sentence is acceptable. Why? Because look down upon is a two-place predicate. Notice that not only base or roots can be predicates. Some derived or some other forms can be predicates. For example, in English as well as in Arabic, as probably in most languages, adjectives are one, all right, base adjectives are one place predicates. For example, expensive or big, they are one place predicates. But in the comparative form, they are two place predicates. So we have, in English, for example, we have the predicate bigger, and we have the predicate more expensive. So the sentence, my car is more expensive, is not acceptable. Is it acceptable? No. All right, my car is more expensive than Mary's. Now the sentence is acceptable. So that's because more expensive is a predicate. The same applies to bigger. My house is bigger than Mary's. Okay, bigger here is a two-place predicate. Now, whether a particle, for example, is part of the predicate or not depends on whether it is predictable by the language system or not. If it is predictable by the language system, then it is not part of the predicate. So, for example, John is fond of his father. Fond of, not that fond. Fond must be followed by of. So the predicate here is not fond of, but rather fond. Whereas in afraid, for example, in an adjective like afraid of. Afraid of is a predicate in English. Why? Because of here is not predicted by the language system. Why? Because it's possible for afraid to be followed by that, afraid that, or afraid to. So, all right, afraid of, afraid to, afraid that. So, okay, here we have three predicates in English rather than one predicate. So the predicate is not afraid, but rather afraid of. But in the case of fond, the predicate is fond, not fond of. Why? Because of is predicted by the language system. The same applies to different. Different is followed by from, and sometimes followed by than, but with no difference in meaning. So the predicate in English is different, not different from. Why? Because from is predicted by the language system. Okay, so let me move on to two other concepts that relate to connecting language with the outside world, which is what reference does. What's the function of reference? The function of reference is to connect language to the outside world. This means we have words in language and we have objects in the outside world. And these words may denote these objects. In addition to reference, we have the concept of extinction. Every predicate in language has an extinction, and extinction covers all potential members of that predicate. For example, if we look at one place predicates, like especially common nouns, like window, for example. Window as a predicate covers all windows in the world. So the extinction here includes windows that were available in the past, windows that are available now, and windows that will be made in the future. Okay, so the extension of the predicate window covers all potential members of that predicate. The same as the extension of the predicate dog, for example. Okay, covers all dogs in the world, all potential members, dogs that exist in the past, dogs that exist now, and dogs that will exist in the future. So that's the extension of the predicate dog. Note that here we have sets. So the extension of a predicate is a set of potential numbers. And sets can be fuzzy. I mean, they can be unclear. We might have some borderline cases. That's why, for example, dog, the predicate dog, you might come across something that looks like a dog to you, but it does not look like a dog to someone else. So does it belong to the extension of, it belongs to the extension of dog for you, but it does not belong to the extension of the predicate dog for the other person. So these are borderline cases. And some predicates come into existence in the language because of these borderline cases. For example, if we look at blends in English, the rationale behind coming up with a blend is probably a lexical gap. There is some predicate, or we have two predicates that do not cover all potential numbers. So there is a need for a third predicate. For example, when brunch in English, brunch denotes a meal taken between breakfast and lunch. So, okay, there was a need for such a predicate. So that's why it came into existence. This need has not arisen yet in Arabic. That's why we don't have a predicate for brunch. Okay, we only have three meals. We have breakfast, we have fatur, ghada, and asha. Breakfast, lunch, and supper or dinner. In English, we have a new predicate mediating between breakfast and lunch, brunch. So it's a meal that's neither a breakfast nor a lunch. So it's possible to have borderline cases. In other words, sets here can be fuzzy. The last concept I want to talk about is prototype. And prototype is often discussed in the context of another concept, stereotype. Prototype of every predicate we have experienced has a prototype. And the prototype is a typical member of the class. So each of us has an image of a dog. And this image is what we call prototype. Has an image of a tree. Has an image of a car. And this image must be prototypical. It's a typical member of the class. Not that we have prototypes for things we have experienced. We have a prototype of or for angel or for jinni. No, we have heard about them, but we have not experienced them. Hopefully not. So we only have prototypes for real things we have experienced. Stereotypes, which is also a semantic concept, stereotypes refers to the characteristic features of a predicate. This simply means that in addition to sense, which I'll be talking about sense in a different lecture, we have characteristic features of a predicate. For example, mother, the predicate mother. Apart from its sense, we have, plus caring, plus working in the field, for example, in an African community, plus whatever you have, plus bail in Saudi Arabia, for example. These are not part of the sense. They are part of the stereotype. So the stereotype represents the characteristic features of a predicate. And note that we can have stereotypes for both real and unreal things. So we have a stereotype for angel. That's why, right? You can write a composition about angels. We have a stereotype of God. We have never seen God, but you You can write a whole book about God, can't you? So this is a key contrast between prototype and stereotype. Prototypes represent real things, things we have experienced. Stereotypes represent both real things and imaginary things, things we have not experienced, things we have heard about, but not experienced firsthand. Note that both stereotypes and prototypes can differ from one culture to another. For example, when it comes to the stereotype of woman, let's say in Saudi Arabia versus an African country. In Saudi Arabia, plus veiled. This would not apply to a woman in the depth of Africa. Plus working in the field. This would not apply to a Saudi woman. Saudi women do not work in. All right, so stereotypes or predicates may differ from one culture to another. The same applies to prototypes. My prototype for dream in Jordan might be different from the prototype of someone in the Gulf, in the Arab Gulf. There it could be what? A palm tree. For me as a Jordanian, it would not be a palm tree. So prototypes woman, for example, the prototype for woman in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, would be different from the prototype for woman for a Lebanese. And for a Lebanese, a woman is supposed to be scantily dressed, walking around in shorts, for example. But in Saudi Arabia, it must be covered in black from top to feet. Okay, so this has to do with culture and even subcultures, cultures within the same main culture. We can generally talk about an Arab culture, but if we look at the subcultures, we find lots of subcultures where prototypes may differ. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much and goodbye.